The pen felt heavier than it should have. Audrey Sinclair remembered thinking that. Standing in the conference room on the 42nd floor of a building she had helped her husband's firm lease 3 years earlier, watching her own signature dry on paper that would erase 7 years of her life. The attorney across the table, Harrison's attorney, not hers, kept his eyes down, shuffling documents with the quiet efficiency of someone who did this before lunch every Tuesday. Harrison Wolfe sat at the far end of the table in a charcoal suit she had picked out for him. He did not look at her once. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago spread itself in every direction, gray and indifferent under a February sky. Audrey pressed the cap back onto the pen, slid it across the table, felt the cold air from the vent above her neck and thought, this is what the end of something feels like. Not fire, just cold air and the sound of paper. She had found out 11 weeks earlier. Not through a private investigator, not through a suspicious text message, through an invitation. A dinner party hosted by Julian Crane, Harrison's business partner, where the seating chart had been arranged by someone who didn't know Audrey was still married. Where she had walked into the dining room and found a place card that read Harrison Wolfe and Genevieve Ashford set side by side. And Genevieve herself already seated, already laughing at something Harrison had whispered in her ear, already wearing a bracelet Audrey had seen on the credit card statement in October and assumed was a client gift. She had stood in the doorway for exactly 4 seconds. She counted them later, lying awake at 3 a.m., reconstructing the moment the way you reconstruct a car accident, searching for the instant before impact, the one where you could have turned the wheel. Then she had walked back out, retrieved her coat from the rack by the entrance, and taken a cab home alone. Harrison came in just before midnight. She was sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of water she hadn't touched. "Audrey," he said. She looked at him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. 7 years of marriage had taught her what his face looked like when he had already made a decision. The particular set of his jaw, the way his eyes went slightly flat, like he had already rehearsed this conversation and was now simply delivering lines. "I think we both know things haven't been right for a long time," he said. She thought about throwing the glass of water at him. She thought about a lot of things. Instead, she said, "How long?" "That's not the how long, Harrison." He looked at the floor. 14 months. 14 months. Audrey had been in Columbus 14 months ago, overseeing the opening of a new branch office for her firm. Sinclair and Associates, the urban planning consultancy she had spent 8 years building from a second bedroom with a drafting table and a laptop held together by a rubber band. She had been sleeping in a Hampton Inn and calling Harrison every night, and he had always answered. Always sounded normal, always asked how the client meetings went. She filed the paperwork herself. She hired her own attorney, a brisk woman named Helena Brooks, who worked out of a Wicker Park office and charged more per hour than most people made in a week, but who also made very clear that she was not interested in losing. Helena had tried. She had genuinely tried. But Harrison's family had money, old money, the kind that comes with 3 generations of estates attorneys and document trails designed specifically to obscure. Audrey's firm was thriving, but thriving was different from 7 figures in offshore accounts thriving. The settlement she walked away with was fair on paper. Fair on paper, Helena said, with the tone of a woman who did not entirely believe the words she was saying. What it was not, in practice, was enough. Not for what came next. She found out she was pregnant on a Thursday afternoon, 6 days after signing the divorce papers, sitting in the bathroom of her rental apartment in Lincoln Park. A 2-bedroom place with a radiator that knocked at 2 a.m. and a view of a parking garage. She had known distantly that it was possible. She had not allowed herself to think about it. She sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. The tile was cold through her jeans. At some point she became aware that she was talking. Not crying, just talking, in a low, steady voice, telling herself, okay, this is where we are. Let's figure out what's next. That was what Audrey Sinclair did. She figured out what was next. It was the thing she was best at. She called her sister Bonnie that night. Bonnie drove over with Thai food and a bottle of sparkling water and did not say anything unhelpful. They sat on the living room floor because Audrey hadn't bought a couch yet and ate pad CU out of the containers, and Bonnie said, "Whatever you need, whatever it is, tell me." "I don't know yet," Audrey said. "Give me a week." She gave herself 3 days. She told Harrison by text, because she was not going to sit across a table from him again and watch his face run the calculations. She told him she was pregnant, that she intended to keep the baby, and that she expected him to engage with his legal responsibilities as a father. He called within 20 minutes. She let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was a masterpiece of careful language. "I'm surprised. I think we should talk. I want to handle this properly." Every sentence structured to commit to nothing. His attorney called Helena the following morning. What they offered was not child support. What they offered was, Helena said carefully, a one-time voluntary payment in exchange for a document that would limit Audrey's ability to make public statements about the marriage, the divorce, or Harrison Wolfe personally. The number attached to this offer was something Audrey could have spent in 18 months on childcare alone. She told Helena to decline. Helena said, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." There was a pause. Then Helena said, "Good," with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been waiting to say it. She was 7 months pregnant and standing at a bus stop on Michigan Avenue, in a January that had decided to be personal about it. The kind of cold that gets inside your coat, inside your bones, when the bus pulled up and she got on and immediately gripped the overhead rail because her center of gravity had not been where she expected it to be for several weeks now. The bus lurched. She didn't fall, but she came close, and the man in the seat directly beside where she was standing stood up immediately and said, "Please take this." She looked at him. Mid-40s, dark coat, the kind of face that had probably been conventionally handsome once and had aged into something more interesting. He was holding a briefcase on his lap and had already shifted to the edge of his seat to stand. "I'm fine," she said, because she always said that. "I know," he said, "but the seat's yours if you want it." She sat down. Not because she needed to, or not only because she needed to, but because refusing seemed more effort than accepting, and she was 7 months pregnant in January and she was tired. "How far?" he said. She looked at him. "Sorry," he said. "That was intrusive. I have a reflex. My sister had 3 kids in 4 years. I learned the trimester system by accident." 7 months, Audrey said. "And you're fine." His name was Declan Marsh. He told her that a few minutes later, when the bus had settled into its rhythm, and they were both staring at the street outside. Not the way strangers do when they want to stop talking, but the way people do when talking has gotten unexpectedly easy, and neither wants to make it awkward by acknowledging that. He was a structural engineer. He had an office in the Loop and a project in River North that was currently giving him what he described as a consistent low-grade headache, which made her laugh. She told him she ran an urban planning firm. He said genuinely, "Sinclair and Associates? The Columbus Transit Corridor project?" She turned to look at him properly. "You know it?" "I pulled the report when we were bidding on a pedestrian infrastructure project last year," he said. "It's excellent work." She didn't know what to do with that. Someone who knew her work on a bus by accident in January. It seemed like the kind of thing that happened in a story someone else was telling. She got off 3 stops before he did. He handed her a business card just before she stood. Not in the pushy way, the way of someone who had decided something. More the way of someone who wanted to leave a door open without insisting she walk through it. "If you ever need anything," he said. Professionally or otherwise. She put the card in her coat pocket and walked to her apartment through the cold, and did not call him for 6 weeks. The twins arrived on March 15th, early and fast and terrifying in the best possible way. Audrey had known since month 5, a fact she had absorbed alone in an ultrasound room, while the technician tried to read her expression. She had called Bonnie from the parking lot. Bonnie had screamed. Audrey had sat in the car for a few minutes, hand on the steering wheel, doing the math in her head, then said out loud to no one, "Okay, 2. We can do 2. She named them Willa and June. They were born 6 minutes apart. Willa came first and announced herself immediately. June arrived quiet and wide-eyed, blinking at the lights like she was taking inventory. Harrison's attorney sent a letter 3 days after their birth. She read it in the hospital room while Willa slept on her chest, and June slept in the bassinet beside the bed. And the letter said, among other things, that given the unexpected nature of the birth of 2 children rather than 1, Harrison Wolfe wished to open a discussion regarding appropriate parental involvement going forward. She put the letter in her bag. She looked at Willa's face. She thought about the word unexpected. How it had been used to describe something Harrison had simply not been paying attention to. She texted Helena. "He wants to talk about involvement. He hasn't called once." Helena replied, "I know. Save everything." She called Declan Marsh when the twins were 6 weeks old. It was a Sunday mid-morning, and she was sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by the particular chaos of new parenthood. Burp cloths, a white noise machine, a swing she had assembled incorrectly at 4 a.m., and then corrected at 6, and she told herself she was calling because she had a question about a structural report she'd seen him quoted in. Which was true. It was just not the only true thing. He answered on the second ring and sounded genuinely pleased to hear from her, which she found unexpectedly steadying. They talked for an hour. He asked about the twins by name. She had mentioned the pregnancy on the bus, and the names were on his firm's congratulatory note, which Helena's paralegal had apparently forwarded to the wrong email address and which had ended up in Declan's inbox by mistake. He had sent a response anyway. "Congratulations. Hope everyone is healthy." She hadn't seen it until now. "You sent a card," she said. "To a stranger. It seemed like the right thing," he said. She didn't have a response to that. She looked at Willa asleep in the swing. She thought, some people just are what they appear to be. It happens. They had lunch the following week. It was not a date. It was lunch. Sandwiches at a place near her apartment. Bonnie watching the twins. Audrey arriving 8 minutes late with dried formula on her sleeve that she discovered halfway through the meal. She told him about the twins. About Harrison. Not everything, but enough. He listened the way people rarely listen, not waiting for his turn to speak, not storing up the useful parts for later. Just listening. He told her about his own marriage, which had ended 4 years earlier. No children. The divorce had been quiet and sad, the way some of them are. Two people who had run out of things they wanted to do together and were honest enough to say so. "That sounds almost civil," she said. It was, he said. Civil and still completely awful. She liked that he didn't dress it up. Harrison filed for joint custody when Willa and June were 4 months old. Helena called her on a Tuesday morning and used the word filed with a careful neutrality that told Audrey everything about how Helena felt about it. "He wants joint custody," Audrey said. Flat. "That's what the filing says. He has met them once. For 40 minutes. In my living room while his assistant waited in the car. I know. He brought them matching outfits from a boutique in the Gold Coast. Size 3 to 6 months. They were already in 6 to 9, Audrey," Helena said. "I know. We're going to document everything. The visitation record, the communication record, the financial record, all of it. You have been consistent and he has not, and the court will see that." She sat at her kitchen table after she hung up and looked at the twins in their bouncy seats, Willa gnawing on a teether with an expression of focused determination. June staring at a mobile overhead with the particular intensity of someone working through a philosophical problem. 7.5 pounds each now. Audrey had weighed and logged every ounce of it. She thought about Harrison in that conference room in February, not looking at her. She thought about Genevieve Ashford's bracelet on the credit card statement. She thought about the letter with the word unexpected. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work. The custody hearing was set for September. In the intervening months, Audrey ran her firm, fed and bathed and read to her daughters, finished the Columbus follow-up report, hired 2 new associates, fought with the building's management company about the heat, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, started spending time with Declan Marsh in the way that stops being about sandwiches and structural reports, starts being about something else entirely. It was gradual. That was the thing she kept coming back to later, not a single moment, but an accumulation of them. The evening he came over to help her assemble a crib she'd ordered wrong and stayed for dinner. The Saturday, he drove her and the twins to her sister's place in Evanston, because her car was in the shop, and he offered before she could figure out the logistics. The way he held June through a long stretch of fussiness on a night when Audrey was running on 4 hours of sleep, walking the kitchen floor, making up nonsense songs in a low voice, completely unself-conscious about it. "You're good at this," she said, from the couch where she had collapsed. "Practice," he said. "I told you, my sister." "You're good at it anyway," she said. He looked at her from across the kitchen. June had fallen asleep against his shoulder. He said quietly, "I know what I want, Audrey. I'm not in any hurry, but I want you to know." She looked back at him. She thought about the conference room in February, about the cold air from the vent, about what it felt like to have someone look at you and see something worth staying for. She said, "I know." The hearing lasted 2 days. Harrison's attorney was polished and expensive, and spent considerable time painting Harrison as a devoted father who had been shut out of his children's lives by a bitter ex-wife. The word "shut out" appeared 7 times. Audrey counted. Helena was better. Helena put the visitation log on the record. 17 months of documented contact, including 6 no-shows, 2 instances where Harrison canceled with less than 2 hours' notice, and the single 40-minute visit where the outfits were the wrong size. She put the financial record on the record. She put Harrison's own texts on the record, including one from March, 2 weeks after the twins were born, that read, "I think it's probably better if I give you some space right now. Let me know when you're ready to discuss next steps." The judge was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Holloway, who had clearly seen versions of this before. She listened. She asked careful questions. When Harrison's attorney suggested that Audrey's new relationship indicated instability in the home environment, Judge Holloway looked up from her notes and said, very evenly, "Counsel, I'd like to stay focused on the children's documented needs and the documented history of parental engagement. Let's do that." Harrison's attorney moved on. The ruling came 6 weeks later. Primary custody to Audrey, supervised visitation for Harrison, with a path to unsupervised if he established consistent engagement over the following 12 months. Child support calculated properly this time, with Helena's full attention on every number. Audrey read the ruling at her kitchen table, the twins asleep in the other room. She read it twice. Then she called Bonnie, who cried. She called Helena, who said exactly what I expected with a satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. She texted Declan 3 words. "We won. Come over. He brought dinner." He sat across from her at the kitchen table. And they ate takeout in comfortable quiet. And then Willa woke up and he went to get her before Audrey could stand. And she listened to him talking to her daughter from the other room. "Hey there, good morning. Are you ready for the second half of your day?" And she felt something in her chest that was not grief and not relief, but something more durable than either. The gala was Declan's idea, not in the sense that he planned it. It was the annual Architecture and Urban Planning Leadership Dinner, which Audrey had attended every year since 2019, which this year happened to fall on a Friday in November when the twins were 14 months old and Bonnie was available to babysit. "We could go together," Declan said. "Officially." She looked at him. "Officially. As in, not incidentally, not as colleagues. As in." He paused in the way he paused when he was being precise, not unsure. "As in, I'd like to be the person standing next to you." She bought a dress. Dark green, floor length, the kind of thing she hadn't worn in 2 years. She got her hair done, for the first time since before the twins were born. She felt, getting ready, like she was reassembling something. Not going back to what she was before, but forward into something that fit differently and better. They arrived at 7. The Palmer house, grand and gold-lit the way it always was, the atrium glittering with people Audrey had worked with for years. Declan's hand was at the small of her back as they walked in, and she thought, "I am not nervous. That's new." She did not see Harrison immediately. She saw Genevieve first, standing near the bar in a silver dress, laughing at something with a man Audrey didn't recognize, and then turning and seeing Audrey and going very still for half a second in the way of someone recalibrating. Harrison was beside her. He looked up a moment later. Audrey looked at him across the room. She did not look away. She didn't need to. For 7 years she had moved through this city partly defined by his name, his connections, his version of who she was and what she was worth. She had signed papers in a room where he wouldn't meet her eyes. She had spent 7 months pregnant alone in a too-cold apartment, figuring out what came next. What came next was this. Her firm, her daughters. Declan beside her, already shaking hands with someone he knew, already drawing her naturally into the conversation. Harrison said something to Genevieve. Genevieve put her hand on his arm. They moved toward the far end of the room, away from Audrey, and it was the most consequential thing Harrison Wolfe had done in 2 years. He moved away. She stayed. The profile ran in Crane's Chicago Business the following spring. The headline was about Sinclair and Associates landing a major regional transit contract, the largest in the firm's history, a public-private partnership that would reshape 3 neighborhoods on the city's south side. The photograph was taken in Audrey's office, her drafting table behind her, plans unrolled and held down at the corners with small weights she'd had since graduate school. A colleague forwarded it to her with the subject line, "Saw this." Not surprised. She printed a copy. She tucked it into the folder where she kept things she wanted the twins to see someday. The custody ruling, Helena's first letter, a photo of the bus stop on Michigan Avenue where she had gripped the overhead rail on a January afternoon and held on. Willa and June were asleep in the other room. Declan was in the kitchen, doing something with garlic and olive oil that smelled like a Sunday evening should. The radiator knocked. The apartment was warm. Audrey Sinclair set the folder on the shelf, turned off the lamp, walked toward the sound of someone cooking dinner in her kitchen, and thought about how the end of something, it turned out, was just the shape the beginning made on its way through.